But first, it's not what China says, but what China does that shows the true character of the communist superpower. Just a few days ago, after China reassured the ASEAN summit that it had no territorial ambitions, it's revealed that a Chinese survey vessel, protected by heavily armed Coast Guard cutters, has been illegally mapping Indonesian waters for weeks in the disputed South China Seas. As well, the Chinese Coast Guard have just used water cannons to try and impede the access of Filipino ships to another disputed reef in the South China Seas. And there's the rioting in the Solomon Islands, seemingly triggered by tensions over China policy, amidst claims that the Prime Minister there had been illegally bought off by China, which has been heavily investing in the islands as part of its so-called Belt and Road Initiative. Also causing anger, public servants in the Solomons have recently had their wages cut, allegedly to bail out a failed Chinese housing development. Now, these scenes of rioting in the capital Honiara have already prompted the government, the Australian government, to dispatch more than 100 police and defence personnel to try and restore a bit of order, just 4 years after an earlier Australia-New Zealand rescue mission ended, and that one lasted over a decade. Our government insists that the intervention is to keep the peace, not to take sides in local politics, and certainly not to back the pro-China Prime Minister against an opposition that would have preferred not to break relations with Taiwan in favour of the oppressive regime in Beijing. In any event, all of this is a sign of China's increasing activity in our region and the trouble it's causing. Which brings me to today's speech at the National Press Club by the Defence Minister, Peter Credlin. Now, it was a vintage Dutton speech, forthright, plain speaking, the sort of speech we've come to expect from him, but really seen from other ministers at the moment. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why the government is struggling. Here is Dutton speaking frankly about the challenges posed by an increasingly aggressive China.
Now, regrettably, China is using its increasing power in security, trade and economics, media and the internet to compel compliance at the cost of respect. As China is engaged in these worrying activities, it's also rapidly expanded the size and capability of its military. Today, China has the largest navy in the world, some 355 ships and submarines. Its naval battle force has more than tripled in size in the last 2 decades alone. And averaged over the last 4 years, China has built naval vessels to the equivalent tonnage of the entire Royal Australian Navy fleet every 18 months.
And he spoke of the nuclear risks as well.
China has amassed more than 2,000 ground-launched ballistic missiles and ground-launched cruise missiles with a range of up to 5,500 kilometres. Over the next decade, China's nuclear warhead stockpile, estimated to be in the 200s last year, is projected to reach between 700 and 1,000 warheads. Every major city in Australia, including Hobart, is within range of China's missiles.
It's a while, isn't it, since we've had ministers be so upfront. And Dutton didn't miss taking a shot at recent comments from former Prime Minister Paul Keating, a man who, let's not forget, has acted as an advisor for many years to China's Development Bank.
Now, Australians expect their governments to speak frankly about the challenges our nation faces, to not ring-fence them from difficult issues or insult their intelligence, as Paul Keating did from this very stage only a few weeks ago. Both the Prime Minister and I have spoken about how the times in which we live have echoes of the 1930s. The world would be foolish to repeat the mistakes of the 1930s. We live in times of high tension, but the region is not on an inevitable path to conflict.
The issue of Taiwan has heightened debate on China's territorial aspirations and its timetable that it hopes to achieve them by. For those like Paul Keating who want to suggest that Taiwan is not a vital strategic interest of ours, well, they're wrong. Not only would a successful invasion of Taiwan crush a fellow democracy of almost 25 million people, it would imperil Japan and South Korea and massively destabilise our region as countries either made themselves impregnable or made the best deal they could with Beijing. On Taiwan today, Peter Dutton said this.
And whilst the current debate is about Taiwan, the analysis must be more honest. Yes, there would be a terrible price of action, but the analysis must also extend to the price of inaction. If Taiwan is taken, surely the Senkakus are next. Please don't rely on your imagination. The Chinese Communist Party could not be any clearer, not always with their words, but certainly with their actions.
And highlighting the difference between the government and the Labor opposition, Peter Dutton reminded the audience.
Without security, prosperity is impossible. And without sovereignty, you don't have a country. Australians understand this and they respect governments which take tough but necessary decisions to deliver security and defend our national interests. Now, that is why the coalition government has been embarking on our path since we came to office. In 2013, we inherited a policy and humanitarian catastrophe. Labor's weak security policies had resulted in 50,000 people arriving, as we know, into our country on more than 800 boats, and tragically at least 1,200 men, women and children drowned at sea. Now, we made the difficult decision to put in place policies which regain control of our sovereignty by securing our borders and breaking the people smugglers' business model. It was something that many claimed could not be done.
You know, he hit the bullseye on the target when within a couple of hours, Paul Keating issued a statement of his own, claiming that Dutton outlined, and I'll quote, a chillingly aggressive and unrealistic scenario as to Australia's foreign and defence posture in the region. A posture, said Keating, that is unremittingly unrealistic and inappropriate to Australia's vulnerable geographic circumstances. He went on and said, and I quote, Dutton is a dangerous personality who unfortunately is the Minister of Defence in Australia. Now, all in all, vintage vindictive Keating, but it says, doesn't it, just how much Peter Dutton gets under Labor's skin and shows the Australian people just why, in these troubled times, we need more ministers with backbone, not the sort of apologists you find in Labor's ranks.